Uh-oh.
Okay, we'll start with this. There appears to have been an opponent change, an alteration. Initially, Balaussa Muzdiman of Kazakhstan, unbeaten, was supposed to be taking on America's own Rosalinda Rodriguez, an experienced fighter, but what I thought would have been a winnable fight for Balaussa. Now, she's going to be fighting the Philippines' own Maria Pinili. Not as experienced as Rosalinda Rodriguez, the girl doesn't even have a profile picture on BoxRec. Sporting a professional record of 7 wins with 1 loss and no draws, 2 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 8 professional bouts. Not as seasoned a fighter as Rosalinda would have been. A reason wasn't given. A reason hasn't been made available as to what led to the opponent's switch. Was there a money issue? A visa issue? Was there an injury? Did Rosalinda become injured in preparation for this fight? We don't know. What we do know is that Maria was last in action earlier this year in January opposite the ring Sharamay Salvador, a journeywoman with an upside-down record who Maria beat over 8 rounds. In fact, the vast majority of fighters that Maria has beat have upside-down records. The only fighter that she fought that has a winning record is the one that beat her, Althea Porez, back in July of last year. And so Maria rebounded off that loss early this year, and now she's supposed to be fighting Balaussa Muzdiman, who we talked about in my previous video, a seriously talented fighter, skilled, and in terms of her methodology, bears a striking resemblance to Gennady Golovkin in his heyday, hailing from Kazakhstan, just like Gennady. But it's difficult for fighters from this region to gain any traction in their careers because there's not really a booming boxing scene in Kazakhstan per se. They produce a lot of amateurs, and they have their own domestic action every so often, but nothing that rivals the UK boxing scene or the US boxing scene, that to really make money, they gotta venture outwards. Outside of Kazakhstan. Which is difficult because a Kazakh fighter doesn't have a built-in fan base in America like, say, a Puerto Rican fighter would or a Mexican fighter would. Very few fighters from Kazakhstan that I've seen over the years have gone on to have the same success as a Gennady Golovkin. And there have been attempts. I remember Denier Yelusinov. Yeah, he was with Matchroom for a bit, then he just disappeared. Yanibek Alimkhanalai has attempted to follow in Gennady Golovkin's footsteps, though without the same accord, without the same success, notoriety, and marquee value. He's trying. I remember the lightweight contender Firuza Sharapova. Very good female fighter. Skill. Flew under the radar for years, then got her shot at the big time with Katie Taylor, and she came up short, but actually gave a great account of herself, though after that, she seemed to have retired. Very unfortunate because she was really, really good, and there's no shame in losing a competitive decision to Katie Taylor, but after that fight, she just kind of disappeared and faded into the background. That attempts have been made to get Kazakh fighters the same celebrity, the same notoriety as Gennady Golovkin, but it's been difficult, and it could be just as difficult for Balaussa. For the same reasons, unless she gets a liaison, somebody in this side of the world who's willing to invest in her, pick her up, because the skills are there. You can see them plain as day. And she happens to campaign in a densely populated weight class with many, many good fights to make. She has the good fortune of campaigning in the women's bantamweight division, where Dina Thorsland currently reigns as that division's unified champion. Shernika Johnson, who's going to be in action this weekend, she's got the WBA title, and America's own Sharita Metcalf has the IBF. And aside from the champions, there are many good contenders in this weight class, enough to keep the fighter busy.
Why is that a good thing?
Because you don't want to campaign in a barren division, a barren weight class with no fighters in it like Clarissa Shields does. How are you supposed to keep busy? How are you supposed to keep active? How are you supposed to build up fights and build yourself up if there's nobody around? Campaigning in a densely populated weight class in women's boxing is a blessing, and Balaussa,
she campaigns at 118, which is very, very deep.
I suppose the saving grace for Balaussa is that whoever's handling her career, they're doing a good job of keeping her busy. She had 2 fights in 2023, 3 fights in 2024.
How many more is she gonna have this one?
I anticipate that she stops Maria Pinili. That's the look of it to me. She's gonna stop this broad.
Balaussa has a lot of knockouts.
And she's managed to rack them up, all in the absence of a big-time promoter. Now, if you want to get a gander at this fighter to see what I'm talking about, look for Balaussa Muzdiman on the undercard of Yanni Beck's next fight next month on the 5th.
You're gonna like what you see.
It's sort of like if Megan Fox could box as good as Gennady Golovkin, if you can believe that. In men's super middleweight news, Dimitri Bivol offered some advice to Terence Crawford on how to beat Canelo Alvarez, at least from his own experience. He needs to get used to the power and pressure of 168 because it's different. Big difference, to be honest. Maybe he will get used to it, and how he will be feeling himself the same way he is fighting. How his training camp will go on. A lot of questions. But he is able. He has good skills. He's awkward. He can use 2 boxing stances. It gives him benefits, of course.
Imagining this fight, you kinda have to imagine that Terence Crawford is gonna try to move and punch because he's slightly taller than Canelo Alvarez, slightly longer, so he's gonna have to use every advantage. His wingspan...
It's one of the few advantages he has in this fight. Movement could be another, but Canelo Alvarez by now is quite accustomed to chasing down moving targets. We saw that in the Caleb Plant fight,
the Saunders fight, the Charlo fight, to a lesser extent the Edgar Berlanga fight.
And these are all bigger, noticeably bigger, and younger men than Terence Crawford is, every single one of them acclimated to this weight where Terence Crawford is not. Dimitri Bivol continued, "It's not only about getting used to the power, it's also about being mentally ready, because when people are not prepared mentally, they are like afraid or scared, you become weak. Your body becomes weak. Mentality is a very important thing for this fight. At the same time, we saw how Canelo was fighting against other guys like Charlo, maybe Callum Smith, and we saw a huge difference. I think it's not because of the weight class, it's about the mentality of the opponents."
I think I understand what Dimitri means. That a lot of these guys, they just showed up for a check. They didn't actually think they could win. When you think about how Jermel Charlo fought, or how Edgar Berlanga fought, they were happy to just survive. They weren't there to fight. They weren't there to win.
And that boils down to mentality. That, buddy, you lost the fight before you set foot in the ring. You were defeated already.
And I don't think Terence Crawford is that kind of guy, that kind of fighter. Mentally, I think he's pretty strong.
From a mental standpoint, I think he fancies himself a competitor, a challenger. This, at this point in his career, is the only kind of fight he gets out of bed for.
I've already been a champion at 4 weights, undisputed in 2 of them, lineal in all of them.
A lot of people think the only reason that Terence is taking on this fight is because of the money. And I'm not naive, you know, the money's got a lot to do with it. Of course, it's prize fighting. But why does anybody want to take on a Canelo Alvarez fight? Because of the money. So it's not different when Terence Crawford does it. The difference is his mentality. He truly believes he can win.
There are a lot of people out there that think he can too. They think that he can do to Canelo Alvarez what Floyd Mayweather did to Canelo so many years ago.
Except that the discrepancy in weight between Canelo and Floyd all those years ago was not as great as this. Floyd didn't jump up 2 weight classes to fight Canelo.
It was only 1.
And he was fighting a much greener Canelo Alvarez than the one that stands before us here today. That's not saying that you can't give Floyd credit. That's saying that that was a long time ago, and Canelo has amassed considerable experience since then.
Enough that you can't use that fight as a parallel for this one. The circumstances are completely different.
That was 22 fights and 12 years ago, over a decade.
It's pretty foolhardy to think that Canelo Alvarez, after that duration of time and that many fights, is the exact same fighter. He's a lot more experienced.
For Dimitri Bivol, it all boils down to mentality. The fighter's mentality going in. And I think that Crawford is mentally strong, but so is Canelo.
You can't discount the physicality of the thing, though, can you? Canelo is acclimated to this weight by now. He's used to it. Terrence is not.
The night of the fight, it will have been over a year's time from Terrence Crawford's last outing, which was all the way down there at 154. Your next fight is at 168. Can you carry around that much weight and fight the same way? Stay in character?
It's a legitimate question.
And can you neutralize Canelo Alvarez's power? Because the last time we saw you ate a lot of right hands from Israel Madrimov, who's no Canelo Alvarez.
It's intriguing.
There's been some rumors, some rumblings about who's going to distribute this fight. Initially, I thought it was going to land on DAZN. Now, rumor has it, it might end up on Netflix, and that many more people might end up seeing it as a result. If they use the same structure for this fight that they used for the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson fight, this is huge.
You always say that about Netflix.
Well, they have over 300 million subscribers. Do you understand that? That makes Netflix tantamount to a terrestrial network like an NBC or a Fox, a WPIX.
That kind of a subscriber base, having that kind of reach to reach across that many households all around the world.
Now, they could go the conventional route and bill this as a pay-per-view, and if they do, I think it does 1 million or over 1 million through conventional means. But if you want to get the most eyes on this thing,
you make it available to every existing Netflix subscriber all around the world. And I promise you, this is going to be a whale. You understand that by making big-time boxing matches available to that many people, that could revitalize the American boxing scene, because that's what's been missing. The good fights have been too hard to get to, tucked behind paywall after paywall.
When boxing was at its biggest, when it didn't cost as much to watch. So if a Netflix were to step in and make this available to all of their existing subscribers, you won't need a pirate stream to watch the fight. Just a Netflix subscription, and most people already have one. Just a few things to think about, but let's not put the cart before the horse, because Canelo's got to make it past William's skull.
And let's hope that he does. America needs a fight like Canelo versus Crawford, because it captures the imagination, and there are very few fights these days that can do that.
And finally, in men's heavyweight news, upset specialist Agit Kabayel is keen to test himself against either Anthony Joshua or Deontay Wilder. Unbeaten heavyweight Agit Kabayel believes he may return to the ring in autumn and is eager to test himself against one of the division's household names. The 32-year-old German has been one of the star performers at heavyweight since he began to box in Saudi on Riyadh season shows, stopping the imposing 6'5" Arslanbek Makhmudov in December by a fourth-round TKO was considered an upset win at the time. 5 months later, Kabayel ended the unbeaten record of Frankie Sanchez with a display of bodywork and combination punching, which wore the Cuban down, ending in a 7th-round knockout win. Last month, Kabayel scored his biggest win against powerful southpaw and Olympian Zhilei Zhang. Despite being dropped in the 5th, Kabayel weathered the storm and landed a crippling body shot to put the 6'6" Chinese heavyweight down 1 round later to pick up his 2nd consecutive knockout win. The triumph over Zhang earned Kabayel the WBC's interim belt, taking him another step closer to fighting for the full version of a world title. Speaking on his own YouTube channel, Kabayel doesn't expect to land a shot against the Ukrainian, who has been in talks for a rematch with Daniel Dubois next. The former undisputed champion has also been ordered by the WBO to face mandatory challenger Joseph Parker. In the meantime, Kabayel would like to face a well-known name in the division. Does it make sense for us to fight Joshua? Yes, for me it will definitely be fun to box against AJ. I can also measure myself from a sporting perspective whether I'm in good shape against AJ, whether I get along well with AJ. If we just say we want to fight for the world title, only this fight against AJ would make sense. Wilder would be thrown in again, I think. Wilder would only make sense in terms of his name and standing. Joshua will fight again according to promoter Eddie Hearn despite suffering another career setback back in September. The former unified champion was outgunned by IBF title holder Daniel Dubois at Wembley, but Joshua still harbors hope of fighting Tyson Fury despite the Gypsy King announcing his retirement in January. Wilder's future is uncertain. The former WBC heavyweight champion has lost in back-to-back fights to Joseph Parker and Zhilei Zhang respectively. Following his performances, it was clear that the Bronze Bomber was no longer the force he once was, and it remains to be seen whether or not he will fight again. Rumor has it they're supposed to be putting something together between Deontay Wilder and Francis Ngannou. I heard a blurb about that a couple of weeks ago, but that's all I heard. Just a blurb. Most recent news on Anthony Joshua, according to Eddie Hearn, is that he's out for the next 8 weeks. At the moment, the Fury fight doesn't look likely, but we can't really start planning too much until we know he's fully ready to resume training. It's an injury he's had for a while, and he resumed training, and he's just not ready to start camp until he's a full 100%, which he's not.
I don't expect Agit Kabayel to land fights with either Deontay Wilder or Anthony Joshua. I don't. For them, he's just a high-risk, low-reward.
I understand that after that run of fights against Makhmudov and Sanchez, then Zhang, he wants to take his foot off the gas. He wants an easy one. In his mind, a fight with Deontay Wilder or Anthony Joshua satisfies that. But he's not going to get those fights, and that's reality.
Outside of a Riyadh season show, or a Ring Magazine show, just any one of those cards that Turkey bankrolls, he's too dangerous, and it just doesn't pay out enough to fight him.
That's how people are looking at him. So I think ideally, Agit Kabayel's next fight would depend on who Usyk fights next. That if Usyk fights Daniel Dubois, then I would like to see Kabayel versus Parker. If Usyk fights Parker, then I would like to see Kabayel versus Dubois.
I don't know if that's how it's gonna happen, but it would be interesting.
Up until the point that Agit Kabayel started fighting in Saudi shows, he was the best heavyweight that nobody was talking about, nobody knew about. But I remembered him from a 2017 Monte Carlo show that Matchroom put on, where he beat Derek Chisora. Looked good doing it.
He sort of just disappeared after that. He kept fighting, but his fights were under the radar because he's based out of Germany.
So now, outside of being used for another one of Turkey's cards, you don't go back to Germany and start having big fights of your own. I mean, Germany's got a boxing scene, but it's not a very big one.
And while he's had some fantastic performances, I don't think he's yet in a place where he headlines his own shows and makes comparable money to what he's been making in Saudi.
I think the most that he can do is fight in some stay busy fights, some easy ones, up until such a time as the green and gold title becomes vacant, because Usyk is not going to be around forever. At some point, he's going to drop that belt.
Or, if somebody takes it from him, that's somebody that Agit Kabayel can go after, because he is interim champion.
But as far as a Wilder fight or a Joshua fight, that ain't going to happen, Captain.
I don't think it is.
Because he's established himself as a bit of a bogeyman and a hot potato.